for the adaptive performance profiling, we might start out by just tracking the performance of large event handlers or large chunks of script, and then when we notice that one of them is slow, then we'll say, okay, now we need to drill down and figure out what the performance is of all the functions that are called within this script or within this event handler. Then we can basically keep going down level by level by level. And then that means that we collect the performance information for the slow parts of the application, because that's what we keep drilling down to, but we never add the overhead of performance profiling to the parts of the application that are already fast enough.
Right. And so then the other interesting thing about adaptive instrumentation is that it doesn't have to be the same user, right? We have a wide variety of users coming to the application. Right? We can have, I don't know, 1,000 of hits an hour, say, right? And then different users will effectively get different portions of the instrumentation, but on the server we'll actually be able to aggregate and roll up this data together to get more information about what's going on. So going back to this drill down profiling, suppose you start by instrumenting the application very coarsely, and then user A gets that coarse grained instrumentation, and then we find out a bottleneck, and then user B gets a second version of the instrumentation that's instrumented slightly differently from user A's. And then this is how drilling happens over a variety of users. And that's actually drastically different from what you would typically see in a debugging session, which typically happens for a single user of the application.
So we might be using Ajax scoped website right now and without noticing it with these techniques.
It's possible. Right.
Scary.
So should we talk about deployment just a bit before we move on to the Power Tool demo? So one interesting thing to notice is that there are essentially two ways we can deploy Ajax scope, and we should point out that initially we implemented Ajax scope as a proxy. Right. As a proxy, it was possible to install it on our own machines, and any user could actually download it and install it on their own machine. And by virtue of doing that, they would be instrumenting potentially any form of JavaScript traffic that is coming to their browser. Right. So suppose you are browsing cnn.com, you have the ability to put a proxy over here. Right. So this is the proxy that sits on your machine over here. This is Ajax scope, and then it can get information from, say, your development server, but it could also be getting information from a third-party site like cnn.com over here. Right, and then the JavaScript code in cnn.com would be rewritten according to a policy that we specify. Right, and this is actually great because it's wonderful for experimentation. We have the ability to go out there and experiment with pretty much whatever we wish. It's a very simple deployment step, and actually we released this prototype. When was it?
Quite a while, 2006.
Quite a while ago. It's been a long time.
Yeah, early 2006.
Right. So that is not what the Power Tool is.
No, this is not. This is kind of part of the history.
The proxy is great for doing research and experimenting because you can actually plug in your own JavaScript rewriters in the tool that we released. Basically, just write a DL that conforms to an API, and you'll get the JavaScript parsed out for you. You look for the parts of the code that you care about and add the instrumentation.
So these APIs are actually open, and it's possible to come in and play around.
Yes, and we have our sample project that will build one of these things for you in our in the download of the research project.
Right. So that download is on Microsoft Research.
Yes, that download is on Microsoft Research, and it's called AjaxView something, I guess. AjaxView.
Close enough.
Yeah. But it's not great for the web app developer over here because if you put this in front of your server, you're adding extra network hops, you have more machines and more things that can go wrong, and the proxy really, it's not integrated with Visual Studio, and it's not built necessarily to scale up and be like super performant.
So basically in the long run, as a developer, what you would want to have is something that actually sits very close to your server or on the same machine as the server itself. Over here, let's reuse this picture over here. So this is kind of the alternative to client-side deployment that we showed on the right over here, and is something that also integrates into Visual Studio. And actually, what we will demo in a second is something that meets all of these goals.
Yeah. So what we're going to demo in a second is basically a JavaScript rewriter that plugs in as an IIS module. Detects whenever anything that's JavaScript is going over the wire, including JavaScript embedded inside HTML, and then rewrites it, collects the logs, presents a nice admin interface for users, and then basically the collected logs can be downloaded into Visual Studio. So you can quickly take a look at what the performance profiling. Let me make that S a bit more like an S instead of. Okay.
So there's something interesting that I also wanted to point out before we sort of move on to the demo, which is in this picture, everything pretty much that we discussed so far is browser agnostic, which means that you can use any browser that you wish to, or the user can use any browser that they wish to.
Right, you don't control what browser.
Exactly.
The
We
user
generally
wants to
do
use.
not control which browser that the user will use, and we don't really care, because all we do is we do source level instrumentation in a way that is browser compatible.
Yeah, so we actually haven't gone through, I think, rigorous testing for every browser out there, but we have run through pretty extensive testing with both IE and Firefox, and also done testing with Google Chrome
Right.
and Safari, and basically, because we're only changing the JavaScript code and we're using JavaScript standards, we don't have any big problems there.
Cool. Let's
Should
get
we do
into
the
that
demo?
demo.
Yes.
All right, let's do that.
Great. So we're going to show you a demo of the Microsoft Visual Studio
2008.
Ajax Profiling Extensions.
Power tool.
Power tool. And what I have open here right now is the admin interface. So to our Power tool running inside IIS installed on this computer. So what we have here is a Power tool that's going to let us add profiling code to JavaScript. And we have a couple of test JavaScript applications so that we can see what the behavior of this instrumentation is actually like and what it looks like when you run the whole tool. So this admin interface, there's one thing I want to note now, we can talk about the rest in a second, is that we have an option here to add profiling code to JavaScript that's going out to a web browser, and we have it turned off. So we're going to run through and I'm going to show you what these applications
So before you go on, where does the admin tool come from? Does it come with the Power tool?
That's right.
Yeah, the Power tool includes the admin interface as well as all of the modules that install into IIS to do the instrumentation, and also the code that plugs into Visual Studio to actually display all the data that's collected by the server.
Excellent.
So
Okay.
in other words, you should be able to replicate this demo for your own application by just downloading the Power tool.
In 5 minutes.
Also,
Yeah.
Cool. Excellent.
Okay. So the first thing I want to show you is just that we have a test application here that draws ants around the screen, and they follow the mouse around. And there's a bunch of JavaScript running here to make all this magic happen. Would you call it magic?
it's magic.
It's magical. So I want to show you the source code to this application. So if we say view source, well, we can go in and we can see that there is a bunch of JavaScript here in this program, and it's regular JavaScript code. There's no instrumentation here. Wait, let me close this. Now I want to add profiling code to this JavaScript. So I'm going to check this button, and I don't know if our browser's cached this or not. I forget how I set up IIS. So I'm going to go ahead and actually delete quickly my browser cache, just to be sure. Now what? Okay. Let's see. So now when I go back to this ANS test application, it's going to be automatically instrumented by Ajax, the Ajax Profiling tool. And now the program is acting exactly the same way. The ants are still following the mouse around. But when I go and view source, I'll notice that there's actually a bunch of extra code that's been added here. So we have some stuff to collect the logs, flush the logs out to the server every few seconds, and then if I go and look at one of these functions, I'll see that we have a bunch of code here to actually log the fact that we're entering into a function, collect the timestamp, and make sure we record the function name and all that data.
So, but all this instrumentation, this is really transparent. You should never really care about it.
Yeah,
Right.
the user, unless they're going and viewing the source, shouldn't be able to tell that this has been instrumented.
Excellent.
So I'm also going to instrument the second application here, Battleship test application. So here, this application goes and shows you a battleship game where you click around on a screen and try and sink your opponent. So my Minesweeper just got sunk. Let me see if I can sync one of the computers.